think why I see patients from other doctors that have been treated for, quote unquote, just SIBO as one entity, why they relapse is one, they are not put on any sort of diet. And two, they're not distinguishing if they are hydrogen predominant or are they methane predominant? Or are they a little bit of both? Because all of that is going to guide the treatment.
Hey everyone, welcome back to High Intensity Health Radio. It's Mike Mutzel here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today we're going to talk about the gut, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, and how to have a happy, healthy gut with none other than Dr. Vincent Pedre. He has quite an impressive academic background, so I want to let you know about that. And he's got an upcoming book I want to let you know about too. So he did his undergrad at Cornell University and went to medical school at University of Miami. And I wanted to ask you, Dr. Pedre, if you knew Dr. Perlmutter from med school, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then he went on to become board certified in internal medicine. He now runs a very busy integrative practice in Manhattan, and he's the author of the upcoming book called The Happy Gut, which we're going to talk a little bit more about. He's got a great website called The Happy Gut Life. So, Dr. Pedre, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. That's happygutlife.com without the.
Fantastic. I love it. So maybe let's talk about your medical journey and how you got into integrative medicine, and then really maybe more granular, specifically focusing on the gut and wanting to inform others about how they can improve their gut health.
So I actually had finished Cornell a semester early because I wanted to get out of there and get away from the winters. And I had about 8 months before starting medical school. And around that time, Deepak Chopra had just published Quantum Healing, and Andrew Weil had come out with Spontaneous Healing. And I read both of those books, and I found them to be really fascinating. And at the time, I was very into meditate. And I started studying meditation and also incorporating yoga into my life. And by the time I got into medical school, I just felt that this made so much sense that it didn't matter how much they tried to brainwash me into the pharma-driven care, that that seed was planted, and there was nothing that could uproot it because it had been nurtured so strongly. And I had experienced things in my life where they really helped, especially the meditation, that I knew that its power was so great that it didn't matter to me whether science had proved it or not, because I knew from my own experience that it helped. And so I did your regular medical school and went into a Western-based, evidence-based residency program in internal medicine. And it was after I got out of that I kind of, it's almost like you're in this rapidly moving system, and suddenly it stops and everything's still. And this is like the end of residency. And then I was like, now what? What am I supposed to do with this? I wasn't happy with what I had learned. And that's when I started re-exploring and trying to reconnect. So I took a sabbatical year and I worked in a program related to the people that had worked on the World Trade Center site. And we were researching their exposures, but there was a lot of trauma. And around that time, I decided that I wanted to do something else. I had so much free time, so I did a yoga teacher training. And it was amazing because it brought me full circle back to where I had started, which was meditation, breathing, kind of looking at the person with a different perspective. And I started bringing that into my conversations with the people that we were screening that were coming in into our program, because there was a lot of trauma there. And then around that time, I also read Dr. Lippman's book. It was like the 7 steps or 7 keys to wellness, something like that. And I just decided to give him a call. I saw that he was in New York City, and I just picked up the phone and said, hey, I want to meet you. And he was the first one who actually mentioned functional medicine to me. And I really didn't understand what that was. And it took a while actually for it to sink in, because I didn't understand the approach. So I took a little bit of a sideline and trained in acupuncture. And it was really through my acupuncture training that I started to understand looking at the body in terms of processes and systems rather than the Western model, which is looking at your symptoms and diagnosing you that with your, the disease, whether it's, fibromyalgia, because you have the symptoms that qualify you for fibromyalgia, and then we'll treat you with Lyrica. So the end result was no better than the beginning. So, but it was through Chinese medicine that I started understanding the system-based biology approach. And it was what finally opened my mind to understanding what functional medicine was doing. And then it really made sense to me. And that's when I went and attended my first international conference, which was in 2006.
Oh, cool.
And then after that, I was hooked.
Right. Yeah, me too. I think, was that one in Tucson? I know there was an endocrine one.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
That was in Tucson, and they've never gone back.
Yeah, Tucson's a great spot.
Great place.
Love it. Fantastic. Well, let's take that systems thinking and the body-mind approach and apply that to the context of the gut, because that's a huge aspect that I know a core theme in your book is it's not just about probiotics and food, but really how you eat food, community, and how that affects gut health and digestion and motility and all these various components. So maybe give us a snapshot of, kind of your perspective on this whole mind-body approach to gut healing.
Yeah, the way I look at it is a 360 approach to health. And I think as part of that, we're becoming more and more oriented towards community. It's popped up so interestingly through the internet and social media and all. And it's kind of like bringing people back together in different ways, whether it's groups or whatnot. And one thing that when I was writing my book, I was thinking, what types of eating rules could I come up with that assist with digestion? And one of them is eating in community. Like if you think about when you're eating with your family and you're sitting down around the dinner table and you're having conversation, you can't wolf down your food because you're pausing to talk, you're pausing to listen. So it naturally, without you noticing, is actually slowing down the rate at which you're eating, which is allowing for better digestion. And hopefully the dynamic is fun and happy and not argumentative. So your stress hormones are down and low. So, digestion is a parasympathetic activity. You have to be relaxed for it to happen well. And I see with my patients here in New York that they're eating on the run, they're eating at their desk, they have to eat within 5 minutes and allowing for good digestion. So, kind of like that concept of really slowing down. And I think back to things that patients have told me over the years, patients that are adults telling me that one of the best things they remember from childhood was sitting around the dinner table and eating with their family, and how, maybe it was one parent or another that made it really prime importance that the family had to sit and eat together. And just think about, a lot of families now don't do that. Everybody's on a separate schedule, everybody's coming and going, but it's those traditions that, sometimes they feel inconvenient and they can definitely get more challenging as the kids get older. But as much as they fight against it now, it really becomes a grounding point. And there was a reason that, I mentioned in my book, and I spoke to a ritual expert, and one of the earliest rituals was sitting down and eating together. When you think about rituals and even religious rituals, even Catholic religion, a lot of the stories involve breaking bread, like sitting down and eating together. So it's one of the oldest traditions, and there's a reason for that sharing and that occurs, but it also, like I say, it aids in digestion.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. I think this is a great conversation that needs to be publicized and better understood, because we can kind of look at the biochemistry of this from a bunch of different ways. But there's a lot of people telling you what to eat, when to eat, but like you're saying, no one's really making a big deal about how you eat, and not just the chewing and physiomechanics, but that community aspect, which is really important. So what are some of your tips, for example, like with breakfast before work? Maybe people have different schedules. So what should we do, for that, and lunch? And what are tips that you walk through with your clients and your patients to help them kind of create these new rituals? And what are some of the roadblocks that you help people overcome?
So breakfast is a particular challenge because most people have to get out the door really quickly. So, and it depends on the lifestyle of the person. I'm a big in favor of smoothies for breakfast because you can pack a lot of nutrition in a smoothie, and it really doesn't add a lot of time to the morning. There's not a huge amount of prep time, like cooking eggs or making something much more complicated. And that's my usual go-to breakfast because I have to get out the door fast. So I make a morning smoothie, and it might have spinach in it. I use different types of protein powder. Can throw berries in there, but I can get my phytonutrient spectrum right there in the morning. And that's one thing that I encourage my patients to do, is think about how they can add the spectrum of colors into their diet through the plants that they eat, the plants and fruits and berries. Lunchtime, everybody's at work, but often people who can take time to have a lunch break don't. So sometimes it's a matter of negotiating and realizing that, yes, you could take a 30 minutes to eat lunch, or be mindful of the eating. Like, do you have to eat at your desk? Not everyone. Some people are actually chained to their desk in New York. A lot of people, they actually just deprive themselves because they think they have to work continuously through the day, but a lot of that is wasted energy. Like I'm just reading this book called The One Thing. I picked it up at the airport actually when we were at IFM just last week, and it caught my attention because it was not such a big book, and it looked like a neat read on my way back to New York. And it's really about time management, because the big question it asks is, what is the one thing you could do now that would make your life easier? If you think you ask yourself that question, like you could ask yourself that question throughout the day, but what it does is it gets you to prioritize what you're doing. And there's always things you can do to save time. Like, can you delegate some things? Do you have to do this? And sometimes it talks about putting yourself or family at the very top, because you have to do a juggling act. There's no such thing as balance in life. It's really just a juggling act. You're just constantly moving what's at the prime focus, what's the most important thing. And that's what we call balance. But it's really like, if you look at a juggler, they're not really balancing the balls. They're throwing one ball at a time. So they're giving attention to each ball separately. And that's kind of like the way I see life. It's not like a seesaw, like trying to balance things. It's trying to know what it is that you have to prioritize at that time. I mean, the dinner is probably the easiest time to get together and eat in community. That to me is the most important, the end of the day, when everybody can share how their day went, and even just getting together with friends and doing potluck dinners. Just think how great that is.
Oh yeah, for sure. And now, any tips for single people or people without families? What have you found to be helpful there?
I mean, one thing that I used to do when I was single is call up a friend and say, hey, do you want to come over for dinner? And then I would cook. And then the benefit is that the next time they invite you for dinner and they get to cook.
That's fantastic.
So I think doing stuff like that, like being creative and thinking, not to be alone, like to be in community for dinner.
Yeah, that's a great tip. Or even eating out at a restaurant by yourself forces you, sorry, my throat's kind of sticky for some reason, forces you to slow down and take a breath. I find that for me, if I'm traveling and I go to my hotel room and get a whole food salad, I just have this inclination to like wolf it down. But if I eat it at Whole Foods when I'm on the road, or go to a place like there's a lot of great restaurants in New York. Eating at a restaurant, there was a paleo one. It's called Human. Is that it? Or Hugh Kitchen. I
Yeah,
love that. So
you
I would
could
go there and eat above, and there's all these people around, and so you take your time with that. And I think the first step is just to be aware that slowing down for your eating, for your food, is really good for your health. And I'd love for you to kind of talk about maybe a little bit the conversations you have with your patients on parasympathetic versus sympathetic tone, and how maldigestion creates overgrowth of bad bacteria. And we talked offline, you treat a lot of patients now with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So can you make the connection between maldigestion, gut inflammation, belly fat, and so that people are like, okay, I'm convinced I need to slow down and have community and eat my food mindfully?
Well, I mean, it's all connected to also to the diversity of the food that you eat, right? So if your diet is really narrow, which can happen a lot for people who are in on the go, on a rush, so you're usually picking up things that are not necessarily the healthiest for you. So it might be like a bagel for breakfast or a croissant. Then lunch might be a sandwich. Maybe you don't want to sit down and have to eat a salad or like a bowl of vegetables with some protein, whatever it may be. And that creates a much more narrow spectrum of bacteria in our guts. And it was interesting at one of the talks at the conference, the IFM conference, he talked about how our gut bacterial diversity can change by the way that we're eating, and that can happen within a number of days. And there was a crazy experiment I read recently where was the father had the son eat McDonald's every day for a month, and they were checking the bacterial content in the gut, and they saw how less diverse it became.
It's amazing.
Yeah, and there's some interesting studies now about the importance of this diversity. I just had yesterday a patient with ulcerative colitis that did the a stool profile, and on her biodiversity, she was very low. And the interesting thing is that her husband has, let's say, mild IBS-like symptoms, and she has very symptomatic ulcerative colitis right now. And the husband was very close to a healthy normal biodiversity, and you could see the difference. It was kind of neat to show both of them because they're eating the same diet, and yet they had a big difference in the way that their guts are experiencing that diet. So even within that, there are deviations, I would say. But there was another study that looked at the bacterial diversity and metabolic syndrome, and they took this was a fecal microbial transfer from healthy volunteers to males that had metabolic syndrome, so overweight. And they did a transfer, which I think was direct into the small intestine, and then measured over the course of 6 weeks their response to glucose and their insulin sensitivity. And what they found is that after the transfer from the healthy volunteer, that the test subjects actually got better, the ones that got the allogenic transfer. So they did both a transfer from a healthy volunteer, and they did autologous transfer where it was actually the same persons, just to make sure that everybody got the same procedure. Mm-hmm. And the diets were the same among the groups. But what they found was that insulin sensitivity improved. And along with that the the ones that received the allogenic transfer from the healthy volunteers, that their bacterial diversity increased. And another interesting thing was that they had an increase in one type of bacteria that produces butyrate. And it was called, I wrote it down, it's called Rosburgia intestinalis. And it kind of brings up the question of the role of butyrate in metabolic syndrome and insulin sensitivity. But, we see over and over again in these studies the importance of a diverse microbiota and its connection to healthy weight, less metabolic syndrome, and probably a whole host of other things that we'll learn through this microbiome project now and doing these DNA analysis on the gut flora. I think that's going to be really fascinating to get a really big pool of people and see how is the microbiome different among different people.
Oh, absolutely. So let's go back to that patient that you had that had really severe ulcerative colitis, and her and her husband are eating the same diet. So then what do? You look at life history. Was she born via C-section or vaginally, breastfed versus formula, antibiotics? Like, do those questions come out? And then I guess what would be a treatment for someone like that? So they have low bacterial diversity. Are you doing fecal microbiota transplantation? What sort of dietary changes do you do? Are you doing probiotics through an enema? Maybe talk to us using her as an example of, okay, their diversity, we want a very diverse and robust microbiome, but how do we increase that on a practical basis?
Yeah, so the other thing that showed up in her stool analysis was very high calprotectin and eosinophilic protein X. And she's working with a gastroenterologist and getting treated for the UC. And what I'm trying to do is come in and get her off of some of those therapies. She also had very low butyrate production. And we know that, so basically butyrate is a type of, almost like a short chain fatty acid that's produced by the gut, by the bifido in the large intestine. And we understand that that's one of the major energy sources for the colon and actually helps keep the health of the colon lining. So one treatment for her is to use butyrate enemas with sodium butyrate. And you can add things like L-glutamine to the enema. So that's one therapy that I'm going to start her on. Now, it was great that she came in with her husband and we had two different, I could see what his results were and what hers are. So even though it's not FDA approved, and it's only approved right now for C. diff infection, and they are classifying it as a drug, which is kind of crazy. But I spoke to them about the idea of a fecal transfer from the husband who, even though he's not super healthy, but he has so much more of a diverse gut microbiota than she does, that it could only help her improve her situation. So I talked to them about that as well. But I cannot, it's not FDA approved yet. So you can only make the suggestion and then people can do what they're going to do. They might think it's a little bit gross. So starting with a butyrate enema is a good place to start. The other thing with a patient with ulcerative colitis, the high eosinophilic protein X basically shows she's got an invasion of eosinophils in the gut. And the question is, where is this coming from? So is this a parasite issue, or is this maybe related to food sensitivities? My suspicion it's more food sensitivities. It's very hard to diagnose parasites. So the stool study was negative per parasite, but they're not doing the DNA analysis anymore, I don't think. So, at some point, if she's not getting better with these therapies, I would consider doing a parasite cleanse with her, even with negative tests, because I know how difficult it is to find parasites. Mm-hmm. I do also have the benefit here in New York that there's a Dr. Cahill who does a sigmoidoscopy with a lavage, and then actually will look under the microscope at, he takes a swab, and he will find parasites that are missed by others. It's kind of really neat that he actually will do a mount in his office and look at it under the microscope and can identify the parasites then through a flex sig. So I recommended that for her as well, because it could very well be that there's a parasite in the background that's part of this whole picture. It's not the whole picture. There's a lot of things going on. The other thing is looking at some sort of food sensitivity testing to look at what types of foods. So she's following what they call the specific carbohydrate diet, the SCD diet. But interestingly, I have another patient with ulcerative colitis where we did the food sensitivity test, and there were certain things that were okay on the SCD that he came up as moderate to severe on the food sensitivity test. And ever since we applied the changes from that food sensitivity testing to his diet, he's been doing great, along with all the other interventions. So you want to think about probiotics, prebiotics. I also did she was also having some bloating, this ulcerative colitis patient. So I did do a SIBO test on her, the lactulose SIBO test. And she had a late spike. I believe it was in hydrogen, not methane. And that means basically probably some colon bacteria that have gotten into the small bowel. Because the spike came late, it was more hydrogen producing. So, but I don't jump to put a patient like that on antibiotics because I'm still nervous that there's a lot of dysbiosis going on at the moment. So I rather use an antimicrobial herb as an entry point while really supporting the health of the gut. So I encourage other things like bone broth. It's a great way to build the gut lining, and L-glutamine as well, of course.
Fantastic. That's a great story. And I want to highlight something that I've seen in the research, and I'm not a clinician, so I want to ask your opinion. So the FODMAP diet and simple carbohydrate diet is, as I understand it, restricting the fermentable carbohydrate-based foods like fibers and oligosaccharides and so forth. But we know that those are also the growth for not only for a lot of good bugs and some bad bugs, which is why they're therapeutic for some people that have maybe dysbiosis or SIBO. But you highlighted how butyrate is very anti-inflammatory. It triggers all these secondary molecules that reduce the inflammatory response in the gut and help us burn fat and so forth. So do you think that maybe her bacterial diversity was low, possibly from a really restricted diet in the fermentable carbohydrates? And what do you do for people that have dysbiosis, but you want to increase their bacterial diversity? Like, do you treat first, then add the fiber? I think that's a conundrum for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, the great thing about this particular patient is that she came in with her husband who was following the same exact diet, the SCD. And yet he had a lot of diversity in his gut. So I don't think that in her case, we can say that it's just that. I think something caused her system to drift in that direction. And I think, ulcerative colitis, these inflammatory bowel disease, are complicated conditions. One of the things that came up in her particular food sensitivity was a very severe reaction to gluten, to gliadin. And her husband did not have that. And so I think that there was still some of that getting into her diet, and that could have been causing a lot of damage and inflammation. So maybe it's her overactive immune response that was causing a drop in the biodiversity in the gut as well. So it's sort of hard to say.
There's people that are really high fiber, high fermentable carbohydrates because we know that we don't have enough bacterial diversity, and that's one of the main ways to increase bacterial diversity. And there's people in the SIBO camp that are like, avoid those fermentable fibers like the plague, because they're going to make problems worse, because while they're feeding the good, they're also going to feed the bad. And I think, there's got to be a happy medium here. So as a clinician, you see a lot of patients with SIBO. What are your recommendations, and can people get to a place in their life where they sort of get the overgrowth of colonic bugs out of the small intestine, and they can resume a diet rich in these fibers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things you have to look at, so SIBO can be one of two things, or it could be both. So it could be a predominance of hydrogen-producing bacteria, or it could be a predominance of the methanogens, which are the archaea, which are actually not bacteria. So the interesting thing is that what feeds the archaea? So it's the hydrogen. So they use the hydrogen, then they make the methane. What feeds the hydrogen producing bacteria? That's all the carbohydrates, plant fibers, it's all that. So the way I see it is, if the patient comes in and they have SIBO symptoms, you have to distinguish what type they have, and that's going to then predicate what type of therapy they have to go through. And it's clear also that putting them on a low FODMAP diet, which I find to be easier than the SCD, I think the SCD is a little more restrictive. But in general, I'm having a lot of success with the low FODMAP. So you put them on a low FODMAP diet to get them through. And I think why I see patients from other doctors that have been treated for, quote unquote, just SIBO as one entity, why they relapse is, one, they are not put on any sort of diet. And two, they're not distinguishing if they are hydrogen predominant or are they methane predominant, or are they a little bit of both? Because all of that is going to guide the treatment. And I think just as we change over time, like, you have to walk the patient through, and you have to have a little bit of a washout period where you're ending the treatment, but you're still following the diet, so you don't want to overproduce. Maybe you start adding bifido as one of the early probiotics, and then maybe you also add a soil-based probiotic, because the soil-based organisms are going to produce antimicrobials that are going to keep the other organisms in check, like the archaea, so you won't start to get a resurgence of symptoms. And then as you do that, very carefully, you may add some prebiotics, so like arabinogalactin from larch tree, to help promote more of those good bacteria. But it's almost like you're walking this fine balance, and you have to base it on how the patient is doing. And sometimes you'll say, yes, let's start testing outside, and either the patient does okay, or some of the old symptoms start coming back, and then you have to backtrack. And maybe you need to add an antimicrobial herb, which to me is becoming more of my favorite treatment than reaching straight for antibiotics, just because they have such a broader spectrum of antimicrobial activity. And I just feel like it's safer for the person, but I still do it on a case-by-case basis. Depends. If they are, I know I'm going on and on here, but if they are methane predominant, the research shows that they're not going to respond to rifaximin alone. And so then you have to think about, and they don't respond so great to just neomycin, but if you add both rifaximin and neomycin together, then you get like an 85% cure rate with that. And that's still, you still have to do it with this integrated approach where you're making sure that you're doing the right things with the diet. And obviously, you don't want a person to have to eat this way for the rest of their lives. So the idea is that you're getting them from point A through point B. The thing is, you don't always know if the trip from A to B is going to be 3 months, Is it going to be 6 months, or it might be an entire year? And that's kind of the great thing about what we do as clinicians in functional medicine, is that we develop this team approach with patients, where you're really kind of walking the walk with them, and you're traveling through this recovery with them. And in this team approach, I think you're more effective in making them better, because then you're more in tune as to when it's okay to take the next steps. Instead of saying, just take these antibiotics and you'll be better, and then 3 months later they come back, they're relapsed, and you put them on the antibiotics again, and you say, oh, you'll get better this time.
Right.
And so on, which I have seen. I've had a patient, one of my patients had 5 rounds of antibiotic by the time she came to see me.
Wow.
And, and I thought, well, what does the doctor think? You're going to live on antibiotics for the rest of your life? Even though rifaximin has a much more limited, it's not as broad of a spectrum of an antibiotic as something like Cipro or Flagyl, they're still affecting your microbial diversity. Mm-hmm. So you have to take all these things into consideration. It's almost like, we're always taking people, treatments sometimes imbalance people. So we take them out of where we want them to be, but we're doing that so we can get them to where we want them to be.
Yeah, it's paradoxical. I like how if we could just kind of pause right here and expand a little bit on the differences between, what sort of foods or symptoms have you seen to increase the archaea, the so-called methanogens? Is that safe to say, archaea methanogens?
Yes.
And other, hydrogen gas producing bacteria. So have you found any common symptomatology that may lead you to suspect that it's going to be archaea or bacteria that's causing this overgrowth, or any food? We know high carbohydrate foods stimulate the growth of the Firmicutes, phyla, and so forth. So any correlations there with different types of foods or symptoms?
Well, it's going to be the prebiotic foods. So the short chain carbohydrates, those are the ones that are going to promote the growth of the hydrogen producing bacteria. And then the archaea follow the hydrogen producers. So the hydrogen feeds the archaea, which produce the methane. So I don't know if this is a non-scientific test, but if your gas does not smell, then it's methane. If your gas smells, then it's hydrogen sulfide. So that might be a distinguishing factor.
Gotcha. Okay, so that would be our
yeah, because methane is odorless. Whereas the hydrogen predominant is the type that we, that rancid egg smell, rotten egg smell.
Yeah.
That's what makes the gas smell pretty bad.
Right. Interesting.
So
okay.
Whether you suspect SIBO in a person or not, depends on the types of symptoms that they come in with, because, typically they might get very bloated. It's someone who feels really, really bloated after eating a meal, and it can happen within 20 minutes, but it could follow, and they just feel like their gut expands and they're just full of gas. The danger is that you have to always think, is there a yeast imbalance? Because that could also be yeast overgrowth that's causing bloating after a meal. So then you have to go into, well, what types of foods are they eating? So if they're eating a lot of sugary foods, dried fruit, simple starches, you might suspect that there could be an element of yeast there, and you have to look at the tongue and see, is there any code. It's hard from the stool studies because they're not always positive, so it's more of a clinical diagnosis. And then depending on the patient, you have to think, well, why did they get this? Do they have low stomach acid? They have hypochlorhydria, and they are not producing the proper pH to keep their gut flora in check and to kill off any yeast that comes in through the diet.
Fantastic. That's a really good way to break it down there for you. So you mentioned herbs a couple different times, and I would love to hear kind of your go-to herbs. Berberine is popular, oil of oregano. You're treating a lot of people that have been to other clinics, and you're kind of the last resort for these complex GI issues. So what have you had the most success with if people are, they do have SIBO? What do you prefer in terms of herbs?
I mean, there's berberine I love as one of my number ones. I also like that berberine has a lot of other effects that I've found through the research, including improving insulin sensitivity, helping with glucose metabolism and with weight loss, especially weight around the middle. We'll use things like cat's claw, uva ursi, maybe lauric acid. So, and then the other thing that I also think of when treating something like this is biofilm. So whether the biofilm has to be addressed. And sometimes I'm actually treating for the SIBO simultaneously with a yeast overgrowth, or just thinking, depending on the types of therapies, they either start off with that or they acquire it as a result of the treatments. You always have to keep that in mind, that maybe you need to add an anti-yeast at some point. And that's why I like the berberine, because it is like acid also for yeast overgrowth. Those are like the main ones. And yeah, I mean, I love oregano oil too. It's anti-parasitic as well. So it's a good one to choose if you suspect that there might be some underlying parasite. But I would use something else like black walnut and artemisia if I'm suspecting a parasite as well.
Great. And you mentioned that you like the herbs better for the bacteria and the archaea. Do you also like the herbs better for yeast, or do you jump to something like nystatin or something along those lines?
It depends on the patient, because not everyone seems to respond well to the herbs. And sometimes I've, over the years, just treating people with all different types of protocols, sometimes I find I have to jump to a prescription, even if it's just for a little while, to really get the numbers down while they're fixing their diet, and you put them on a restrictive candida diet. And then I may use the herbs as a bridge out of that and be able to continue them on the herbs for a couple of months. Sometimes I'll start them on the herbs if they are really sensitive to die off, and you want to create a slower die off to begin with, and then add an antifungal a little bit afterwards. So, but I don't find that one method works for all. So it depends on each patient. But a lot of times, unfortunately, I wish I could say no, I find that I have to reach for the prescription antifungal, at least at some point in the treatment. And then I go back off of it and go back to the herbs. And again, with a complex approach of looking at balancing the gut flora, doing other things that are going to help keep the yeast in check, is ultimately you want people to not be dependent on this. We're trying to keep on somewhat of a low sugar diet, not refeeding the yeast.
Right. Great info. Fantastic. I have one of my favorite fruits is dried mangoes. So I have to watch that, because I could eat like a whole bag of them at once. And it's something that, is not good for yeast or bacteria. Well, they love it, and it's not good for my body, I guess I should say. So as we transition to final questions, is there anything about your book or your work that you would like to share with our audience that you didn't get to discuss up to now?
So my book, Happy Gut, is coming out at the end of the year. I wish it was sooner, but you have to do a lot of preparation to get a book out the gate. But I think it's going to be great. It's an approach to really get people to realize how important the gut is as the seat of all health. And that's what I call the gut. I believe it is the seat of all health. and it's really sitting at the center, and it's been probably the most neglected organ system, but one of the most important, because everything goes through the gut: assimilation, digestion, our immune system. The biggest presence of the immune system is in the gut, and of course, what we're learning about bacterial diversity, and especially the biggest microbiome that we have is inside our guts, and how that affects us, and exactly, how we're going to be able to manipulate that to create results in health, I think is going to become really big in the coming decade, to really learning about what different type of bacteria in our guts mean and how they affect our health. I was recently at a talk with Dr. Galland, and he mentioned that over 90% of the substances in our bloodstream are actually of microbial in origin. I thought that's crazy. So are we really just hosts for these bacteria that are living inside of us?
Right. That's amazing. Fantastic. All right. Well, and we know that bacterial DNA and bacterial fragments are, if there's too much, like endotoxin, it's linked with heart disease and inflammation and all these various things. So that's fantastic. So your book comes out at the end of the year. You have some bonuses on your website, which we're going to plug in a second, but we have a couple final questions we want to ask you here, Dr. Pedre. So we know that you have an Ivy League background, you're board certified in internal medicine, run a busy practice. We want to know what your morning routine is, because we know the mornings are really times that we have control over, and they can impact the productivity of our day. So what does your morning look like?
Usually I'm waking up around 5:30, 5:45 in the morning. And my first thing is to do some yoga stretches to get out of bed and do some deep breathing. I don't necessarily meditate at that point, but I will at least take a few deep breaths to kind of just get myself back into kind of getting ready for the day. And then I shower like the rest of us, and my morning starts with a smoothie, and I put all sorts of great things into that smoothie. And that's probably my biggest go-to breakfast, is my morning smoothie with greens and berries and protein powder, where it be like and sometimes L-glutamine. I do have regular breakfasts at times, like steel-cut oatmeal or hard-boiled eggs, but probably my predominant breakfast is the smoothie. And then either I'm getting my son ready to go to school also at the same time. So it's a little bit of a juggling act there in the morning. And then when I get to work, I can't do it every day, but I try to have a couple of minutes of meditation, just kind of setting the intention for the day and asking, through meditation, connecting with the, whatever you want to call it, with spirit, with guidance, asking for assistance with my day and for insight into what's going on with my patients and the best way to help them. And then my crazy day got started.
Love it. That's fantastic. So you take the subway, or do you walk into work, or?
I usually subway. Yeah. Because I'm too far away to walk. So right. I usually take the subway. At one point last year, I was actually biking to work for a little while, but the problem with that is that I don't have a gym or shower near me, so then, you add a lot of extra time. And I tend to work out after work. With the way my biorhythm works is I'm not a morning person when it comes to exercise. I have a much more effective workout in the afternoon. Yeah. So like after we get off our call, I'm going to be going and meeting my trainer.
Oh, there you go. I love that. Fantastic. I'm the same way. And actually, our body temperature is higher in the afternoon. Our, testosterone to cortisol ratio and the overall catabolic physiology is in our favor in the afternoon. So unless you're a true morning person and you're just like up at the crack of dawn and ready to go, I think it suits most people to work out in the afternoon anyway. So Love that tip. Now, do you do a lot of meditation at night then? Is that when you because you've been doing this for quite some time, is that when you carve out your meditation time?
Yeah, my bigger meditation time is at the end of the day. So usually right before I go to bed. And that could be like different types of meditation. I've never done transcendental. So I've more used, I started with imagery based meditation, and that was my entry into meditation. And then once I got deeper into it, I found I didn't need the imagery anymore. And I just got into a breath oriented meditation, and I would use something like alternate nostril breathing to center myself. I find that, I don't know if you know what that is, the alternate nostril breathing from yoga. So when you cover one side, breathe in, cover the other side, breathe out, and then breathe back in, and you alternate. But I always find that that's a really good way to kind of bring myself down into my body and to kind of really center before I start the meditation. And then I may go into breath type. I've been exploring different types of meditation. Again, bringing imagery back in. One that I like to use is like creating a place that is safe for you, like it's sort of like your retreat. And for me, it's a mountainside where I've built this beautiful house, and on the second floor it has my meditation studio with giant windows looking out at the valley. And it's kind of like my safe space where I can invite different people in, whether someone that I want guidance from, or someone that has passed, a loved one that has passed, or I can just be in there and just be surrounded by stuff that I love.
It's fantastic.
So those are kind of like my types of meditation that I do.
Yeah, that's a great insight. I think people need tips because while you're learning to meditate, sometimes it's hard to get into that state. So that alternate nostril breathing, I think, is good. Doing some yoga beforehand. And for me, I found that heart math helped me to kind of figure out how to, get into that calm state and be one with your breath and get the chatter, calm down the chatter at least. So
the other one would be brainwave music, the binaural beats. So people that have a really tough time shutting their mind down, to listen to that, and just that entrains your brain into an alpha rhythm. It can be really helpful for people that have the monkey brain and they find it really hard. But I also find that people with the monkey brain can do really well with transcendental meditation and a mantra, like something that they repeat over and over. And the other thing to tell people is that it's just like anything else. Like, could you expect to run a marathon on the first day that you run? Like, can you expect to be really good at meditation the first time that you meditate? But a lot of people give up really fast, thinking, well, I'm no good at this, because they fail after a few attempts. But it's like any other muscle, like you have to practice it. And what I found is that it gets better over time. And now, even if I've had a gap, because occasionally I might get out of the habit, but I find when I go back to it that it's almost like old muscle memory. Like I'm able to jump back and be at a much more advanced level than I otherwise would have been, because I've done it so many times in the past.
Yeah, I can resonate with that. You and I just got back from Austin, from being there for, I think, 4 or 5 days. And, I was socializing the whole time and didn't have time to like meditate, and then so jumping back into it Sunday morning, it was, a little harder than normal, but like you said, it's like exercising that muscle, and over time it got better. So I can resonate with that. Beautiful comments there, Dr. Pedre. So the next question would be, if there's just one herb, nutrient, botanical, or maybe whole food substance, you're stranded on an island, the weather's going to be good, you're going to get plenty of vitamin D, what would you bring with you and why?
You're talking about a food substance.
It can be a whole food, it can be a nutrient, just something that you always have with you. What's your favorite whole food or vitamin nutrient supplement?
Oh, interesting. Like the first mind is that would bring me great joy would be to have blueberries. It's a great antioxidant rich fruit berry, and it's a prebiotic. So it would keep my gut bacteria happy, and I can eat them forever. Like that's my guilty pleasure is blueberries. Yeah, I'll just go through a huge bowl of blueberries in like 2 minutes.
That's fantastic. We get along good because that's one of my favorite foods too. We have them in the freezer at all times and pick them when they're wild here in the summer. I was going to say, for me, blueberries and or chocolate would be one of the two. Great tip there. So the last question here, Dr. Pedre, would be if you were to bump shoulders with Barack Obama or a congressman, maybe in passing in an elevator, and they turned to you and said, Dr. Pedre, as an integrative internal medicine practitioner, what sort of lifestyle or health tip would you want me to understand and share with America that you feel would improve healthcare expenditures and reduce mortality and really improve the health of America? What do you think what comes to mind, and what would you like to share with them?
I think what comes to mind is body metric devices, getting true feedback on your level of activity. Because I think that when people get that type of information and they realize that, oh, wow, I really am sitting for a big part of the day and I'm not moving as much as I thought. That's one level of it. The second level of it is the community aspect, because then you can connect with your peers through these biometric devices, the wearables, and then create competitions of who has the most steps by the end of the week, or whatever it may be. I just recently learned that Oscar Plan here in New York, I don't know if they're everywhere in the country yet, their new insurance plan, that they are giving all their members a wearable. I thought that's incredible, because I really think that we need ways you can tell people to do things, but until you give them real data, I think there's still the lack of motivation. So I think if we can give people data that is personal to them and show them that if they change this, that they're going to improve their health, that's going to go a long way. I mean, I think that's the next step, because the problem is the patient comes to your office and then leaves with all this advice, but then they go out there into the world right, with all its temptations and, all those great foods to eat and sweets and chocolate. And so I think if we start creating this bi-directional interface between the patient and the practitioner that goes beyond just when they are in your office, that's going to be huge. I think that can really help improve the health of people. Then I would get their ear on things like pesticides and GMOs and all that, and are causing, and the environmental toxins that are really part of and at root of this obesity epidemic.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, beautifully said. No one's referred to that type of technology, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, in business or in school or even in fitness, if you can't track it, you can't really improve upon it. And I think people could really benefit from, like you said, realizing that, oh my gosh, I sat all day, or I walked all day. Look at that. And then that competition with, friends and family members, neighbors, or coworkers, I think would really spur some great effects. And I think people can really benefit from utilizing social media in that regard. And I've seen a lot of people lose weight by posting pictures of themselves doing exercises, doing CrossFit, doing weightlifting, and then they start to identify with being a CrossFitter or a weightlifter, and they make behavior choices that are congruent with that thought process. So great information there, Dr. Pedre. So your book's coming out. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you mentioned CrossFit, and that's a big thing in CrossFit is tracking. So you keep track of what you're doing. and that motivates you to continue to grow. And I kind of like what you just said. I was writing it down. If you can't track it, you can't improve upon it. That's a great slogan.
Right. Yeah. What you can't measure, you can't improve. It's
Yeah.
in business. So you can take principles in business, and that's why I encourage people to read all kinds of different books, like from biology, gut health, business, mindset, psychology, so you can integrate all these principles and use them to improve your life. And that's like an old business thing with this Pareto principle and this business development book I read. So
Like, it's really about kind of like business life. It's not really health related, but I found myself using it with my patients. Even asking them in the room, what's the one thing you could do next? Like a patient who's stressed out. What is the one thing you could do to make your life easier right now? Just think about what that makes somebody think about. It's such a powerful question.
yeah, that's great information. And along those lines, audible.com is one of the sponsors of the show. So if you guys want to listen to The One Thing on Audible for free, you can get a free 30-day trial. Just go to hihfreebook.com and you can get a free trial and listen to any of the books that we mentioned today. So Dr. Pedre, thank you so much for being on the show. But before you part ways, please let our listeners know where they can reach out to you and your website about your book and so forth.
Well, the two easiest ways to reach out to me are my practice website is www.pedremd.com, pedremd.com. And the website for my upcoming book is happygutlife.com. And that's going to have a whole bunch of information and ongoing blog posts, things like on SIBO, on different gut-related issues. And I'm also going to have recipes. I have a team of collaborators that are going to be working with me. So I'm going to have Happy Gut approved recipes. I have my yoga teachers who are going to be talking about different types of yoga poses and meditation and breathing. So I think it's going to be a great information source.
Love it. Fantastic. Awesome. Well, keep up the good work and much success to you on the book launch. And I know we'll be in touch. So thanks again for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you.